All right, for this one, we are heading way, way back to ancient Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. And we're going to uncover the pretty wild story of one of the world's oldest drinks and explore how beer wasn't just a beverage. It might have been a fundamental force that helped build society itself. I mean, just think about that question for a second. What if beer helped build the world's very first cities? It sounds a little out there, right? But the evidence we have from Mesopotamia suggests this drink was deeply woven into the very fabric of urban life, of labor, and maybe even the invention of writing. Okay, so before we go any further, we have to get one thing really clear. The beer we're talking about is absolutely nothing like the stuff we drink today. Just forget everything you know about a clear, bubbly, hoppy lager. Mesopotamian beer was more like a thick, cloudy, soupy gruel. It was full of grain, full of residue, a completely different animal. So to really get why this drink was so important, we first have to wrap our heads around what it actually was. This was less about refreshment and way more about being a staple food. And this paints such a great picture of how different it was. We have ancient artwork that shows people gathered around a huge communal jar, and they're all sipping the beer through these long reed straws. Now, this wasn't just for style. The straws were totally practical. It was the only way to get past all the floating chunks of grain and husks on the surface. So it was a social, shared experience from the get-go. And here is the absolute key. Mesopotamian beer was, for all intents and purposes, liquid bread. It was a vital source of calories, it had nutrients, and it was hydrating, all in one package. In a hot climate, a nutritious, grain-based drink like this wasn't a luxury. It was a fundamental part of the daily diet for pretty much everyone. So where did all this beer come from? Well, its story really begins with one of the most important developments in all of human history, the agricultural revolution. You see, Mesopotamia, that land between the rivers, was just perfectly designed for farming. The soil was incredibly fertile, and it produced these enormous surpluses of grain, especially barley. And all that extra barley, well, that was the raw material, the absolute foundation you needed for brewing on a massive scale. It's simple. Without the farms, there was no beer. And this process wasn't just some happy accident. No, it was deliberate and skillful. Brewers would malt the grain, create these special, partly baked beer breads to help the fermentation process, mix it all with water, and then let the wild yeast in the air do its magic. They really had this down to a science, all without any of our modern equipment. Okay, let's dive into this, because this is where the story gets really, really interesting. Beer wasn't just food, it was a powerful economic tool used to organize society. That's right. The laborers who built the massive ziggurats, the temples, the irrigation canals, the entire infrastructure of their civilization, they were paid for their hard work with daily rations of beer. It was literally a form of currency. And this table shows us it wasn't just some kind of bonus or a treat. Right alongside grain and oil, beer was considered an essential part of a worker's compensation. It provided the energy and the hydration they desperately needed to do that backbreaking work. It was every bit as vital as their daily bread. And the proofs is literally etched in clay. Some of the world's oldest written documents are these cuneiform tablets. And what are they recording? Meticulous lists of daily beer rations for workers. This just shows you how central the system was to running the state. In a way, writing itself helped manage the beer economy. But beer wasn't just for the workers, not at all. Its influence spread from the public tavern all the way to the most sacred temple, touching every single aspect of Mesopotamian life. So beer had this fascinating double life. On the one hand, it was the social lubricant. It was at the center of communal feasts and lively taverns, a way to bring people together and strengthen bonds. But on the other hand, it was a sacred substance, something worthy of being offered to the gods in solemn temple rituals. The reverence for brewing was so deep that they actually personified it in a deity, Ninkasi, the Sumerian goddess of beer. And there's this incredible ancient hymn written in her honor that is both a religious prayer and a practical step-by-step recipe for how to brew. How amazing is that? So who was doing all this brewing? Well, pretty much everyone. As you can see, it was happening at all different scales across society. You had women brewing for their own households, and then you had official, professional brewers working for huge institutions like the temples and palaces. So when you start putting all these different pieces together, a very clear picture emerges. Beer wasn't just a drink they had on the side, it was a true pillar of Mesopotamian civilization. I mean, just look at how it all connects. Beer stood right at the intersection of nearly every major innovation of the time. It was fueled by the agricultural surplus, it required technology like pottery for storage, it drove the economy as a wage, it anchored social and religious life, and it was even documented by the invention of writing. It touches everything. And that really brings us to this powerful conclusion. The story of this ancient, soupy drink is inseparable from the story of civilization itself. To understand one is really to get a better handle on the other. So the real takeaway here is that by studying something as seemingly ordinary as beer, we get this incredible, detailed window into how ancient people lived, how they worked, how they organized their societies, and ultimately how they built the foundations of the world we've inherited. Which leaves us with a final question to think about, right? Looking around at our own world, what are the everyday things, the foods, the drinks, the little bits of tech that we totally overlook, but that might just be the fundamental building blocks of our own civilization?